Hello, my name is Sue-Leena and I'm an high school senior, and today I'm going to present my creative writing project, the project I did for Polygence. So I will start with an introduction about my project, a brief introduction, my motivations, what surprised me about the project, what were the challenges I faced, and finally what I gained from the project. So the main question I wanted to answer with this project was how to present a time-based narrative using a blog. And there was also a focus on writing in English and experimenting with the language. What were my motivations when starting this project? Usually whenever I have free time, I start writing, whether it's prose or poetry. And I've been doing this since I was 11, whenever I had free time. But like as the years went on, I had more and more work to do. So usually the only time where I could like write freely without worrying about other things is during the summer. So that's why every year I have like this writing project I do during the summer. For example, last year I joined a workshop in which I shared my stories with others and I got feedback on it. Feedback on it. But usually when I do that, I write in French, which is my first language, my mother language being Creole. And this is the first time I decide to write in English. So this is mostly for fun since um, I thought it would be great to change things up a little, but also since it would also be very good practice if I'm studying in the US. And overall, I think it's very fun experimenting with another language, playing with the words and like synonyms, definitions, etc. Highlight. These were moments that surprised me about my writing. Before I explain that, I'm going to present what my story is about. So my story is titled The Towers in Which No One Ever Sleeps. It's a story that takes place in the future. And I can't go into details because the mystery is an important part of it, but I can briefly give you an idea of the plot. So the main character and a group of people, including the main character, are in a situation where they have to work, to dedicate their life to work out of necessity. And when I say dedicate their lives to work, I mean 21 hours of work per day. And I mean, these are extreme conditions, especially for a character like the main character, which really values just like free will, creativity, and imagination. And so this story focuses on following her and seeing how she deals with all of this. In a surprising way, she does find, sometimes in the story, she does find ways to make the two situations compatible. I won't say anything more. I know that over the course of 2 months, it's a project, so of course it's going to change a lot. But I mean, like the amount of drafts I have is unbelievable. I would say that like if I had to like separate my project, I would like cut it in 4 parts where the stories are significantly different from each other, even if like throughout them there is like this same theme. And speaking of which, I really thought it was very interesting how even if I wasn't trying to, in the end, each of these stories had a common theme of self-expression in an environment that doesn't necessarily encourage it. So I was surprised at how like similar and yet different the story were, because this is the plot of my first story. A character in a dystopian society is on the run for treason, hiding near a closed cemetery, and trying to come up with the perfect message, article, or letter for others to become aware of the corruption. The problem is they only have one piece of paper and an unknown amount of time before they are caught. And yeah, it was very surprising to me. So, some challenges I faced. So, I am an individual writing about different characters. I have to put myself in their place as I am writing in their voice. Usually, what I would do, or if I'm writing as the narrator, it's like only one character. So I would let it be intuitive and not necessarily think about how I can make their voice distinct. As I'm writing about multiple characters in the first person, I have to think about how they would choose to express themselves. So not only the events that happen to them, but also the way in which they tell them are becoming more and more important. And for that, my mentor helped me a lot by providing some examples of writers that did this. One of them was Edwidge Dantica. And with this story, there were two different characters, each going through different things, but what made them different was mostly like their beliefs. How, for example, one of them believed in mythical sea creatures, and the other had a superstition with butterflies, and just like details like that that make them their personalities different. And I mean, it wasn't immediately obvious to me, and I thought it was very helpful. In conclusion, the design of the blog was the most straightforward part for me. It was mostly like a fun moment. For that, I really just let like the feelings I got from the writing help me find the right images to complete them. Um, it was very great way like to end this project, I think. And also on the writing, what I learned as a writer, I learned not to erase myself completely from the story, even if I'm writing about different people. And it wasn't uh, that obvious to me before, and it was very enlightening to know that it wasn't a problem if my own voice got tangled in with the other characters. In terms of writing in English, I think it was very refreshing to know that I can simplify, simplify, and simplify. Not like, because of course, since I'm not writing in my main language, I want this to sound as sophisticated as possible. And it just sometimes it gets in the way of fluidity and simplicity, since I'm basically like, crafting the story as this more like beautiful but not efficient. And I was very happy to know that I could just do it my way. I'm very, very proud of having completed this project in general, and of having that first step, first writing in English, first time publishing a story. And looking back, I can't believe how far I've come with this summer. And I'm very glad to have ended it on a positive note. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for listening.
Hey everyone, my name is Arnav. I'm a senior in high school, and the topic of my research paper was making the NBA more competitive. So, just a little background information about our league. The National Basketball Association is a basketball league, abbreviated to the NBA, and it consists of 30 teams. They're breaking up further into 15 teams, the Western Conference and the Eastern Conference. So, there are two different conferences. And these 30 teams, they each play 82 regular season games, and qualifying teams will play in the playoffs or the postseason, right? So 16 teams, based off the record throughout their regular season games, 16 teams will make the playoffs. and there are 4 rounds to the playoffs, and it's a best of 7 series. So you need 4 games to advance around in the postseason. Top teams from each conference play in the NBA Finals. That's pretty important because 2 teams from the Western Conference can't face off. It has to be a representative from both conferences. How do teams add players? So there are 2 main ways for a team to acquire a player: the NBA draft or the free agency. The draft is college players or foreign players, young players that apply and qualify for a draft. Teams will pick between them. And there's a draft lottery that decides the order of the draft, right? That's pretty important because you don't want the best teams picking first because they'll obviously take the best player, right? The best players or the player with the most potential will go first. And how the draft lottery works is basically, so I just explained that 16 teams make the playoffs, right? If there are 30 teams in the league, 14 teams are left, right, that do not make the playoffs. And out of these 14 teams, they enter a draft lottery. And that kind of decides the #1 overall pick in 1 through 14. Usually the team that did the worst the year before has the highest overall pick or highest overall odds of the first pick. So they have a 12.5% of the draft lottery going in their favor, and that's pretty important when we get later down in our discussion. So the free agency is another way. It's more common, but when a player's contract ends with their team, they become a free agent, and they can either choose to re-sign with their team or sign with another team. So there are some advantages that there between teams. A player would rather play in LA than Charlotte, for example, right? They want the bigger city, that city life, the weather. But in addition, right, there's a lot more that comes with that big city. It's the attention and the recognition, and that leads to more endorsements, more money, and obviously only a handful of teams, will be in LA or Miami or New York, right? You can't have every team in a big city. You have to spread it out throughout the country. Um, and only a handful of teams will get good players if that's really the case. So the salary cap is there to prevent this. A salary cap is basically a maximum or a cap to how much a team can spend on their roster, right? This is just people that play on the court. This is not coaches or other staff hires, right? It's just the 14-man roster. So we classify teams as large, medium, and small in the NBA, kind of, which teams is, bigger cities or smaller markets. But there's no real definition. So I classified them based off their valuation. So a team with higher than a 3 billion valuation is a large market. 1.75 billion to 3 billion is a medium, and under 1.75 billion is a small market team. The luxury tax. So the luxury tax is a way around the salary cap. Teams can go over the tax if the owner pays a tax, right? So a team can choose to go over the cap and spend more than the allocated amount of money if the owner pays a tax, right? So this was inducted in 2003. So I checked the effectiveness, before and after, right? So does the luxury tax really help competitiveness? And it's only been 19 years since it was inducted. So that's 2003 to now, and 19 years before that, so 1984. So I checked the competitiveness 19 years before and after, and I created a point system to see which team was successful in those years. So teams that qualify for a point, qualify for the playoffs will get a point. 1 more point is awarded for each round that they pass. So in any given season, a team can get anywhere from 0 to 4 points, right? So I tally these up for each year in each team. So just sharing some data and some numbers that I found before 2003. So this is before the luxury tax. Standard deviation was 12.8, and the average point per team was 18.9. So after the tax was introduced, post 2003, the standard deviation was 9.5, and the average point per team was 20. So what does this mean for the effectiveness of our competitive? Standard deviation decreased, which is good. That means that points were more allocated. It was more spread out, right? That means that more teams were more successful. There's not just one team dominating the league. So that means that the tax helps, right? That helped competitiveness, but I feel like it's not enough, and we'll get into that. Tanking. So tanking is really a common thing in our league. So what is tanking, right? A team can lose games on purpose to get a higher pick. So as we talked about before, the draft lottery, right? The team that had the worst record prior to the year prior has the highest chance at the number one overall pick. So teams that really want that high pick will lose games on purpose, and they can do this by, sitting players or trading good players or just not signing a good enough roster to win games. And you need to discourage tanking, right? It's obvious that a team that doesn't want to win ruins competitiveness, right? That's another team that we don't need to worry about. This brings me to my first suggestion. Tanking is discouraged if the odds of the lottery is spread out. So what that means is, as I said before, right, 12.5 is the odds that the worst team in the league has. So if we reduce that and distribute it to the other 14 teams, the chance that they get the number one overall pick is lower. And that discourages tanking, right? If you have less of a chance of getting the number one overall pick, you won't take the risk of throwing a season away and mortgaging your future. So that reward is not really as it's not, the risk is not as, it's not worth it. So the argument against my suggestion is that a small market team that does really bad, right, won't get free agents, year after year they do really bad, and if they can't get a high pick, then they won't be, out of um completely losing every season. And I think that's just false, right? A team that's really bad, one player, especially, a 19-year-old kid out of high school, is not taking them and winning a championship, right? That's just very, very uncommon. It takes multiple years for that player to emerge into a star, and it takes multiple players to turn that team into a championship level team. Um, right? So if we make it easier for a middle of the pack team, right? A decent team that maybe missed the playoffs last year, but it's decent. If they have suddenly a chance to get a high pick, right? They just missing that one little piece that will take them to the championship. And so it actually helps medium market teams get out of mediocrity, right? So a decent team that's missing that piece finally gets it, and now they're in contention, right? So a team that missed the playoffs last year is now suddenly, in the playoffs. And that helps competitiveness. There are other problems with the league. The season is too long and injuries are common, right? So 82 games is a lot. And that's just a lot, and injuries are very, very common, right? So basketball is a contact sport, injuries happen, but I feel like it's magnified because of how compact the season is. Often teams, you have teams playing back-to-back nights, or two nights and 2 games in 3 nights, and that's just a lot on an athlete's body. um if the season is too long, you'll have people that load manage. So load management is basically when a player sits out because they're sore or they're tight, but in reality, they're just scared to get hurt or they just need a rest, right? And that's pretty common in today's league. It's because teams can afford to do that, right? So in an 82 game season, it's a lot, which means that you are allowed to throw a couple games away, right? You can lose a couple games because it's such a long season. You can pick it up. Um, a team that just sets their best player will probably lose, right? That ruins competitiveness. And, reducing the season can help increase competitiveness, right? And I like to use the example of the NFL. So the NFL has a 17 game season. You rarely see players sitting out games, right? And that's way more contact than basketball. And the reason for that is just they can't afford to lose games, right? In a 17 game season, there are only so many games. Every game matters. Um, so obviously 17 is not enough for a basketball season, but reducing it will increase the meaning of each game, right? Each game means a little bit more. So that increases competitiveness, right? In addition, um, it brings more attention to a medium or small market team. So what I mean by that is usually a large market team will be on TV more than a medium market team, right? They just attract more, like we talked about before. And if the large market team is just not playing that night, the TV company has no other choice but to air a smaller market team, or even a medium market team, right? So say an NBA fan watches the NBA 4 days out of the week, right? And they're usually large market teams. Now we reduce the season. The large market team only plays twice, which means that a small market team and even a medium market team could play, right? And that brings more attention to a smaller medium market team than before, right? And that brings me to my second suggestion, to spread out the schedule, right? So I kind of talked about this already. Spreading out the schedule, right? Games mean more, people aren't resting, people pay more attention to a small or a medium market team. There are less injuries, right? Regular season games are more exciting. Um, and we went over this, right? They mean more. And, teams are fighting for every game. And I explained why small market teams have more attention, right? So more TV presence and endorsements and things like that. Conclusion, right? So just kind of laying out everything that we talked about. The luxury tax is effective, but I feel like more can be done, right? I listed out more problems in the league. So my first suggestion was to spread out the odds of the draft lottery. And my second suggestion, which we just went over, was to space out the schedule. The last thing to remember is just that not everything can be accounted for, right? At the end of the day, these rules aren't making decisions for the future of a team, right? There's a general manager that does this, right? At the end of the day, he is signing a player, he is drafting a player, right? You cannot stop human error, and not every rule can reduce, an error. It's natural and it just happens. It happens every year. So the last thing to remember is just not everything can be accounted for. The rules are there to help, but you can't account for everything. Lastly, these are the visuals. So if you wanted to look at a specific team, so these are the valuations I mentioned earlier and how I classified them based off their market. And these were the points that each team got, before, or this is after the luxury tax and before the luxury tax. Standard deviations down here and averages down here. So yeah, if you want to take a deeper dive, look at a specific team, feel free to do so. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Hi, I'm Linus Law, and today I will be presenting my literature review on English, Chinese, and temporal reference frames. Many studies have attempted to find whether the language you speak affects the reference frames you use. However, my research has found a few inconsistencies. Let me show you what I found. First, let me propose to you a hypothetical situation. Imagine that you have a meeting scheduled for next Wednesday, but it has been moved forward by 2 days. What day is the meeting on now? I'll give you a moment to think about it. Now, I'm guessing that about half of you answered Monday, and the other half, Friday. The ambiguity seems to be due to forward being interpreted differently. Now, why is that? The answer is temporal reference frames. These are the perspectives with which you perceive time. Here, I have an observer, you, and a timeline representing time. There are two temporal reference frames, ego moving and time moving. Ego moving is where you think of yourself as moving through time to the future, like this. Time moving is where you think of yourself as stationary and time as the one that's moving. In other words, the future moves towards you. This means that in an ego moving perspective, the future is forwards, while in a time moving perspective, the past is forwards. Here are some examples of reference frame use. If you answered Friday, you are using an ego-moving reference frame. It's the same with leave the past behind. Meanwhile, if you answered Monday, you are using a time-moving perspective. Summer's approaching is another example. Chinese also uses these reference frames. 我们进入新的一年 is an example of ego moving in Chinese. It means we are entering a new year. 春天来了 is an example of time moving, and it means springtime has come. Notice that while these reference frames are the same, they manifest somewhat differently in the different languages. So, what research on this has been done so far? Many studies have looked at which reference frame speakers preferred. There were two ways to go about this: by gauging familiarity or by analyzing responses. By gauging familiarity, I mean that the researchers measured accuracy and response times when test subjects were responding to test sentences of a particular perspective. Here is a time-moving example from Gentner and others, and here is an ego-moving example from Huang and Xie. Participants would read the sentence and respond whether the bold or underlined subject is in the past or future of the object. Here are some studies that gauge familiarity. Gentner and others only tested English speakers and tested both accuracy and response time. They found that English speakers were more accurate and faster at responding to ego-moving prompts. Huang and Xie, on the other hand, only tested Mandarin English bilinguals in Mandarin Chinese and English, who had Mandarin Chinese as their first language. However, they only measured accuracy. They found that the bilinguals were more accurate in answering ego-moving sentences in Chinese and time-moving sentences in English. Remember this. Studies that analyzed responses asked participants ambiguous questions like this one. Some, in fact, only asked this exact question. Here are some studies that analyzed responses. Bender and others tested native speakers of German, Mandarin, English, and Tongan using their own system of reference frames. For our purposes, the absolute reference frame is equivalent to ego-moving, and the intrinsic is equivalent to time-moving. They found that Mandarin speakers preferred to respond in the time-moving perspective, while English speakers had more mixed results. Lai and Boroditsky, on the other hand, tested English, Mandarin, and Mandarin-English bilinguals in two different circumstances. They found that Mandarin speakers prefer time-moving and English speakers prefer ego-moving. As their results for bilinguals were clearly different than that of monolinguals, they found that a bilingual's first language affects processing in the second and vice versa. Some studies also investigated the effects of priming. Priming is where a circumstance, prompt, or other condition unconsciously influences somebody to think a certain way. Boroditsky and Ramskar and Bender and others are examples of priming studies. The priming went something like this. Imagine yourself in an office chair. Now imagine the office chair coming towards you. This is the priming for the time-moving perspective, as you are stationary and something else is moving. The priming for ego-moving is to imagine yourself on the chair moving around. Bender and others also had a control condition where they had subjects imagine the comfortability of sitting in an office chair. Boroditsky and Ramskar had other situational conditions, such as waiting to move, actually moving, and having just moved. Here are their results. Bender and others found no effect to their priming, while Boroditsky and Ramskar found that it was thinking that had an effect. Actually moving was neither necessary nor sufficient to have the effect. As might be expected, thinking about moving made people more likely to answer with an ego-moving answer. Gentner and others used reference frame priming, which allowed them to investigate reference frame consistency. They did this by having subjects answer both priming and test sentences which all looked the same, like this. The priming sentence would use one reference frame and the test sentence would use the other one. They also tested cases where both the priming and test sentences use the same reference frame. They found that inconsistent priming and test sentences resulted in slower reactions and lower accuracy, indicating that the processing of these reference frames was a metaphoric system linking spatial ideas to temporal ones rather than directly having a separate meaning like idioms do. Further discussion. Here is an interesting observation I observed from Lai and Boroditsky's results. Lai and Boroditsky asked subjects two different questions, one asking about moving a meeting forward, and the other about moving a clock forward. As you can see in this graph, however, the two questions had rather different answer distributions, particularly for English monolinguals, who unanimously answered with the ego-moving perspective when dealing with clocks, but were more split when asked about moving the meeting forward. Other studies, in fact, showed that English speakers can be split almost 50-50 when asked the meeting question. The opposite difference is found in Chinese monolinguals. The difference isn't as exaggerated. So it seems that different contexts have different answer distributions. Interestingly, Lai and Boroditsky did not seem to make this observation, though it does have some rather large implications. Most studies analyzing responses like Lai and Boroditsky did only ask the meeting question, which is ambiguous in English but not nearly as ambiguous in Chinese. However, if different contexts have different levels of ambiguity even within the same language, these results may not be representative of the language as a whole. This leads us nicely into our last topic, suggestions for future research directions. Future studies that analyze responses should test ambiguous questions in more contexts. Who knows, there might be some that are not as ambiguous in either language, ambiguous in both languages, or have the opposite distribution as the meeting question. The possibility is out there, and we should test that possibility. Also, some of the studies, such as Gettner and others, and Boroditsky and Ramskar, only tested English speakers. It would be fascinating to see the results if they were replicated in Chinese. Finally, all the studies testing bilinguals only tested Mandarin-English bilinguals. We should test English-Mandarin bilinguals whose first language was English as well, if not just to see if the findings for Mandarin-English bilinguals holds up the other way around. Thank you for listening to my presentation.
Hi everyone, my name is Zachary and I'm doing a presentation on my Polygens project, 1MDB, the political economics behind kleptocracy and its impact on Malaysian politics and society. So to start off, let me ask you guys a question. What does a multi-million dollar super yacht, a former Malaysian prime minister, a Hollywood-winning film called The Wolf of Wall Street, and a national reform movement all have in common? Well, these seemingly disconnected array of objects, famous people, luxury items, and historical events are actually interestingly intersect in another unfathomable set of tracks. Large-scale, politically driven economic crime, the ultimate story of greed and power, the Achilles heel of a once great Malaysian government. In 2009, the Malaysian federal government turned state-owned sovereign wealth fund, the Terengganu Investment Authority, into a federal project, the One Malaysia Development Berhad, headed by former Prime Minister Tun Najib Razak. The 1MDB investment initiative was supposed to make Malaysia the Wall Street of Asia, and the 1MDB was intended to be a strategic development company that drives new ideas and new sources of growth in hopes of forging global partnerships and bringing international investment into Malaysia. However, under the control of Najib, his wife Rosbal Mansour, a mastermind financier Joe Low, and several other key perpetrators, more than $4 billion was illegally siphoned out of this government fund, with more than $700 million going into Najib's personal bank account. These funds were infamously discovered to fund million-dollar luxury yachts, a 27.3 million necklace for his wife Rosma Mansour, and funding for Hollywood film The Wolf of Wall Street. Consequently, the public outbreak of this scandal had adverse effects on the social-political climate of the nation that drove a wedge of distrust between Malaysian citizens and its politicians. While these events constitute what is known as a kleptocracy, as defined by the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, 1MDB is the perfect modern example of one of these, as a government by those who seek chiefly status and personal gain at the expense of the governed. Well, this paper that I wrote has two main goals. First is to uncover the historical circumstances that led to and affect 1MDB. The second is to analyze the root causes that allowed this kind of economic crime to prosper in the first place. In trying to answer those questions, I decided to break down my analysis into three main sections. First is economic mechanisms that allowed it to happen. The second is historical and political background. And third is potential root causes. So it all started in 2008 with the global financial crisis that impacted a lot of developing economies, as Malaysia was also impacted by the 2008 financial crisis. However, Malaysia ended up rebounding quite nicely. The federal bank Negara's actions softened the crisis impact on Malaysian economy, and the nation's comeback from the crisis led it to economic stability and showed its potential for growth. This was a high in Malaysia's revitalized economy. And soon after, Najib, the then prime minister, launched 1MDB, the investment project, and it was proposed at a time where neither the citizens nor the legislators were questioned or imagined having it develop into the world's next financial crime, since it rode upon a wave of restored economic confidence. Well, the first section broke down into economic mechanisms, the first of which was fraudulent and illegitimate economic procedures. One of these came from a company named Abar BVI, a company that 1MDB used as a venture capital account that was cuttingly renamed to resemble a subsidiary of another legitimate account, Abar Investments PSJ, whose name does not include the last word limited. Abar BVI Limited was the company used. According to the United States Department of Justice, it is possible to register an entity with a name that mimics the name of existing entity without the need to prove a relationship to that existing entity. And this was a common technique to lend the entity in question to appear as legitimate. The second was political facilitation. 1MDB's money was transferred through political means, and thus it often required execution of carefully manipulation through the head members of the 1MDB leadership. Thirdly, there was many attempts to cover up economic fraud. In one instance, a huge loan was made to an account in the money during the Good Start phase, the first out of 4 phases in the 1MDB. 1MDB officials misrepresented a company named Brazen Sky, a company set up by Joe Low, one of the key perpetrators, to divert 1MDB funds to be valued around $2.3 billion. 1MDB then received $700 million from Deutsche Bank into Abar PJS Limited, which was then transferred to Abar Securities, another account which is illegitimate. However, as money flowed in a circular pattern, Brazen Sky received 7 transfers in 2014, seemingly as if it was returned on their initial investment. Moreover, the circular flow of these capital repeated several times, by which November 2014, the DOJ reports that money has been passed through this Brazen Sky accounts more than 6 times. Because of the circular flow of transactions in and out, it seemed as though money was flowing in and out, but in reality, it was just a meticulous laundering of money, part of an elaborate cover-up scheme used to reaccount for the money that was siphoned out. Lastly, 1MDB had a revolving door kind of situation. There was a cyclical nature between members of the 1MDB leadership team and the accounts in which the money flowed to, and it conveniently transacted in and out to and fro different bank accounts, which is a key reason contributing to the success of 1MDB's kleptocratic flow, because each of these players are interconnected and probably they were well-known friends of each other. So they helped each other in this kleptocratic process. The second section details historical and political background information. 1MDB is not solely an economic event. The circumstances that spiraled Malaysia into kleptocracy were heavily influenced by other social and political factors. This section helps to explore how race-based politics, the nature of the political system, and racial tensions fostered an environment for corruption to blossom. Because Malaysia has been multicultural, consisting of 3 main races, the Chinese, the Malays, and the Indians, the government structure implemented focused on a well-rounded approach, but it was far from perfect, as there were many levels of racial exclusions across the years. Instances of ethnic polarization can be validated through historical examples. For example, in 1965, the upsurge in racial tensions led to the Sino-Malay racial rise between Singaporeans, who are mainly Chinese, and the rest of the nation, resulting in Parliament expelling Singapore from the Federation of Malaysia. In 1969, the May 13 riots erupted, leading to interracial violence between Chinese and Malays, where around 200 people died and over 6,000 people lost their homes. While traditionally ethnic Malays were relatively poor, while a group of elitist Malays aristocrats controlled the nation's politics. On the other hand, Chinese and Indian populations who were formerly immigrants typically attained a high socioeconomic status. Soon after the 13 May riots, the Malaysian political system was redesigned in order to utilize ethnicity to leverage political dominance over parties, channeling economic resources to selected ethnic groups, which were the Malays. This mainly took a form of exclusive affirmative rights and affirmative action programs that only Malays had. The political climate of Malaysia and corruption. Well, Malaysia's only ruling party until 2018 was Barisan Nasional. Many point out that economic policy actively serves as a tool to control the political scene, and ethnicity and economy became linked to the Barisan Nasional's political survival. Many were skeptical that these actions were politically motivated. Another key idea was this custom of corruption, and with precedents set by prior leaders who have used corruption to stay in power. Mahathir, a previous prime minister, was an infamous user of corruption to arrest opposition forces to silence them. He also removed court judges and also controlled the press. These actions that should not be present in a democratic nation. The third part was organizing an opposition voice against corruption. Part of what led to the outbreak of 1MDB was how Malaysian people acknowledged corruption and acted upon it. The best example was a man named Anwar Ibrahim, who was a government official who set up a reform movement called Reformasi and ran an anti-corruption campaign called KKN, Malay for corruption, cronyism, and nepotism, in order to battle these concepts. Systemic corruption was a unifying factor that prompted the rise of Anwar, and these sudden events tainted the image of the political party, it weakened its grip amongst Malaysians, and this crisis started a national reform spirit that reminded the nation of the severity and urgency to re-emphasize injustices of governmental corruption. Anwar's Reformasi movement became the hope amongst Malaysian youth that rallied against the voices of government to affect future change. Lastly, Malaysian politics was on the brink of challenge. The outbreak of 1MDB was the last straw that pushed it over its edge. Even as foreign press continued to exert pressure over 1MDB, Najib remained adamant in denying any accusations of immoral behavior to the abuse of his political power, serving as an indicator of cover-up and suspicion. Through the lens of events following the reveal of 1MDB, UMNO's reputation the reputation of the Malaysian government became tainted with images of corruption and injustice, while people slowly started to unite against a common resolve. They effectively lost the trust of Malaysian citizens and the credibility as a government that prioritizes their citizens' best interests. The last amongst the three sections was the root causes. With the multicultural, political, social, and economic factors at play, it can be linked to three main causes. The first of which was sovereign wealth funds. Sovereign wealth funds was government-owned managed reserves of money aimed to achieve a wider economic goals. The 1MDB started off as a government wealth fund with the Terengganu Investment Authority, the TIA, who was the predecessor to 1MDB. It was set up as a sovereign wealth fund. However, while the public contention for a sovereign wealth fund seems purposeful, the debates under which the TIA revealed a conflict of interest between state level and federal representatives that cast doubt on the transparency and political motivation that fueled the decision-making process behind the scenes. When the state of Terengganu was revealed that the capital and funding was being taken away and being reallocated on the national level, so did their plans of revamping and improving their state. So a lot of people in Terengganu and people who noticed this they doubted whether the initial setup of the TIA was really in order for the federal government to take over and eventually, or was it really in the best interests of 1MDB, as many sovereign wealth funds in the past have a very low level of transparency and have low level of accountability. The second reason was governmental power in protecting 1MDB. Since 1MDB was founded as it was founded by the Malaysian government, it was birthed into a place of royalty and power. Its purpose was envisioned by the government in a time where political power was strongly uncontested. Government power was not only allowed 1MDB to effectively execute its fraudulent activities, but also shielded it from anti-corruption checks and balances. Thirdly, institutional validation and kleptocracy. Upon hindsight, someone might ask, how did 1MDB, whose implications were so blatantly, shamelessly, and overly visible, be kept in the dark for so long? Well, the scandal was carefully concealed by multiple layers of political and social complexity that potentially blinded the world from earlier recognizing its potential magnitude and terror. 1MDB's diverse web of connections enhanced its reputation. It had the backing of many trustworthy institutions from 5 different countries. From its inception, it was known to be the product of a Malaysian government, and it was likely that the international financial courts and citizens would be less speculative of fraud coming from a nation's own government, and thus attracted less attention on the global stage. 1MDB also had a money laundering scheme that involved large corporations, such as Citibank, JP Morgan Chase, Standard Chartered Bank, and investment bank Goldman Sachs. Through the analysis of 1MDB, we can learn 2 main things. First, the functioning of a kleptocracy scandal can only be done through institutional, economic means and political means as well. It's the intersection between these 2 areas of study that allowed kleptocracy to be apparent on such a global scale. Second is the corrupt incentives and actions of politicians and beneficiaries that enable crime in the highest levels of society. Moreover, 1MDB set historical precedents in 2 main ways. It was the leading cause for drastic political exchange of power, one that overtly exposed Malaysia of its systemic corruption. The kleptocratic story of 1MDB is more than a mere embezzlement of money, but the tipping point of a widespread governmental change, ending over 60 years of Barisan Nasional rule, a reign uncontested since Malaysia's independence. Secondly, 1MDB brought up a medium for interracial unity. While previously Malaysians fought over affirmative rights actions and unfair treatments across races, 1MDB's conflict was money, a topic that was universally affected all racial and ethnic groups. 1MDB united a multicultural and previously divided Malaysia against the common foe and succeeded in doing so. 1MDB thus sparked and ignited the conflict, but also formed racial cooperation and instilled a sense of national unity. Although the system, like any political system, is not far from the reaches of corrupt politicians, the public exposure of 1MDB on an international and domestic level warns the world and its kleptocratic leaders that citizens, even in a historical polarized constituency like Malaysia, ultimately hold the power and ability to voice their issues against corruption and can succeed in doing so. No kleptocratic system is tolerated with a strong and united constituency. I hope you enjoyed learning more about my research paper, and thank you so much for listening.
Hi everyone, my name is Richard Jia and I'm currently a high school student at Westlake Boys High School in Auckland, New Zealand. Today, I'll be presenting my research on mental health through the lens of law, both historically and in contemporary times. Law is an experience developed by reason and applied continuously to further experience. The field of law is something that requires continual adaptation. As societal understanding and perception of modern issues evolve, relevant laws also change to reflect the prevailing thoughts of the time. The thoughts of mental health, which has become increasingly prominent in recent decades, is an example of how the law has constantly adapted to fit the social climate, as our understanding of mental health expands. The legislation surrounds it will also see changes. The continuous shift in mental health has led to great controversy surrounding its connection to the law. There is a natural inclination to make presumptions about law based on current understandings of mental health and through some connections it may exist. There are evolving aspects of mental health that cannot be captured in legislation, written decades prior. The dynamic and developing nature of mental health continues to contradict and challenge existing constructs and legislation. For this reason, this paper argues the necessity for mental health law change to continuously adapt and change as social opinion and constructions evolve. When looking at a historical context, the initial connections between law and mental health can be traced back to many centuries ago. Likewise, the changes and adaptations in law can be seen in our society's ever-developing knowledge or perception of mental health through the different legislation created during each period. Insanity and the prospect of mental health are defined primarily through social constructs and social perception during each period. In the period before the 18th and 19th centuries, mental health law was scarce. Statute de Prior Grata Regis was one of the earliest acts that attempted to intertwine mental health with mainstream legislation. It attempted to separate mental retardation from mental illness, and to an extent tried to use these distinctions to empower and benefit the government. These acts allowed the government to seize the estates of these individuals and manage them until their death. During the early 19th century, early involvement of law in mental health can be seen through the 1808 County Asylums Act, which was the first act that permitted English counties to build asylums, the main purpose of which was to remove lunatics from gaols and workhouses to build buildings where they could be easier to manage. These changes could be encapsulated in the 20th century, when during this period, mental health law had already become intertwined greatly. Changes in the 19th century were ultimately encapsulated in the Mental Treatment Act of 1930. By law, asylums became mental health hospitals, and the terminology and understanding of mental health became recognized to be almost equal as important as physical health. Mental health law and legislation culminated in 1959 when the 1959 Mental Health Act was introduced. The catalyst for such changes was the creation of the Percy Commission. The Commission's clear vision to remove stigmatization and poor terminology, paired with a general climate of medical optimism and advancement during the period, allowed for a positive, revolutionary step in combining mental health with law. The evolution of the understanding of mental health has led to various laws and amendments being formed throughout history. From the earliest lunacy acts to the 1959 Mental Health Act, they have helped define contemporary mental health laws. Although these laws are primarily formed in the UK, it has been a quintessential aspect of mental health's history within legislation. Many countries have taken inspiration and developed their own interpretations of mental health and their inherent connection to the law. However, these inherent links and understandings are again being challenged in the face of social change, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. In contemporary times, traditional mental health laws have been subject to debate, primarily due to the changing definitions and climate of the period. During this period, pre-existing mental health laws have been reviewed, while new laws have been introduced. This is especially evident in light of the recent COVID-19 pandemic, where various countries are once again re-examining the legitimacy and relevance of their mental health laws. During this period of time, there have been large-scale recordings of change within mental health legislation, unlike in the 19th and 20th centuries, when changes in the mental health laws were predominantly recorded in the UK. The response to the COVID-19 pandemic has important ramifications for mental health systems and patients they serve. Significant changes in mental health policy have been prompted across 5 major areas: regulation, financing, legislation, workforce development, and accountability. The numerous advancements present an unprecedented opportunity to evaluate how much mental health policy has been adapted in the post-COVID-19 period. An example of this would be in the United States, where mental health law has become a subject of debate in the past 2 years. In 2020, the US Congress passed 3 major economic relief packages, reportedly with the possibility of more on the horizon. All cases of introduced legislation are useful in judging changes made to mental health policy. New Zealand presents a unique case with the indigenous culture's emphasis on mental well-being. During the pandemic era, New Zealand has made continued efforts to make amendments to its pre-existing Mental Health Act, with the amendment bill passing after the 3rd reading. Furthermore, as the concept of mental health has become more mainstream in society, it has consequently impacted the social perception of mental illness. This change in perception has led to the introduction of laws and legislation in many other countries. For example, countries like Qatar and China that are comparatively behind on their mental health laws compared to the West have doubled down on their mental health strategy. Countries such as the United States of America and New Zealand, which have pre-existing mental health legislation, have continuously amended and added to their laws, while countries like China and Qatar have begun to introduce their first mental health legislation. This is all evident of change in the relationship between mental health and legislation, especially in recent years, where global events like the COVID-19 pandemic have greatly impacted people's mental states. Governments, as a result, have had to adapt, whether through the introduction of new mental health laws or amendment to old ones. However, there has still been resistance to change in mental health and legislation. Speaking broadly, the mental health law has faced trouble that relate to the definition of mental health itself. The term mental health is one that is ambiguous, one that can be placed on a continuum. This influences the legislation aspect of mental illness. As the definition of mental health continues to evolve, it subsequently changes the effectiveness and understandings of the laws. A study done by Jennifer Crocker in 1999 found that self-stigma is a large aspect of mental health stigma. As an individual's situation differs from another's around them, their response to internalizing situations changes. This can ultimately have a negative impact on a person's mental self-esteem and self-efficacy, which may lead to altered behavioral representations. Additionally, social stigma continues to have profound impacts on an individual struggling with mental illness. In contemporary context, athletes such as Naomi Osaka and Ben Simmons have had ostracized by society for their bouts with mental illness, frequently being criticized by the media and fined millions of dollars, in an illustration of how mental health stigma is still a main problem in our society. Mental health conditions are quickly gaining a greater presence within mainstream society, with the importance of mental health laws gaining greater recognition as a result. These attitudes towards mental health are ever-changing, and the perception of mental health has undoubtedly changed, from the earliest lunacy acts to contemporary universal definitions from the Mental Health Organization. However, we as a society must accept and understand the mental health laws while attempting to destigmatize mental health within society. Otherwise, an inability to sympathize and understand mental health legislation would dismiss a large section of the subject of health, consequently resulting in society not being able to deal with mental disorders, stigmatizing a large number of people. The laws that we amend and introduce will be most effective when society deems these laws respectable. While stigma remains evident in society, within individuals and themselves, and amongst healthcare professionals, the ethical problem of mental health and health stigma places an additional barrier on clients who need mental health services. Future legislations should ensure adaptation that can combat increased stigma in society. As we gain more knowledge in the field of mental health, the connection with the law will be more important in the coming years. Thank you.